Okay, have a seat, everybody. We'll proceed. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I think
Is this-
that's the Zahn.
Yeah, You need that?
Yeah, that's what I want. Now this exhibit from Leonard Zahn and Associates, Inc. for release Friday, July 6, 1979. Tobacco Research Group says continued research needed to find causes of cancer and other major diseases. Now, isn't it a fact, Dr. McAllister, that Dr. Little and basically all the executive directors of the Council for Tobacco Research would respond every time a Surgeon General's report came out or something from the National Academy of Sciences or something was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association or the New England Journal of Medicine, which was negative to the tobacco industry, the Council for Tobacco Research would respond telling the public that there were flaws in the studies and it wasn't necessarily so, and that other distinguished scientists disagreed with the public health officials.
That's not true to my understanding and what I've seen. You said every time these people came out. There was some debate in the early period of the organization where many distinguished scientists did in fact disagree with the epidemiological data in the sense that it had flaws, it had not been controlled for other factors. And in the early days, it was true they wrote a large number of press releases. I don't know about every time somebody came out with a statement, but there were certainly a lot of press releases that pointed out that there were a lot of distinguished scientists that in fact did not agree with the causation statement, not with disagreeing with the data, but with the statement of causation. And in the early days, I think those pronouncements were justified. I'm not talking about Mr. Zahn's memo.
I want you to assume that Dr. Julius Richmond has testified in this case. He was a former Surgeon General of the United States, as I'm sure you know, that prior to the 1979 very thick Surgeon General's report coming out, which as you know was the 15th anniversary of the famous 1964 Surgeon General's report, that the day before this was published, the Tobacco Institute called a press conference. They preempted the Surgeon General's report. Were you aware of that?
Don't know anything about the Tobacco Institute, sir, other than its existence. I don't know what they do and when they did it.
You have worked for the Council for Tobacco Research for 14 years, and you know nothing about the Tobacco
I
Institute.
didn't say that. I said I don't know when they do things. I don't know when they give statements or when they don't give statements. Of course I know about the Tobacco Institute, but we don't have anything to do with them.
They are a public relations arm of the tobacco industry, aren't they?
I don't know, sir.
What
I
are
really
they?
don't know. I don't know. I don't know what their job is. I don't really have any idea. We never had anything to do with them, or I didn't.
Well, doesn't the Tobacco Institute get the annual reports of the Council for Tobacco Research? And don't they use those annual reports to attempt to debunk all the legitimate science from the medical community in this country?
Objection forms well beyond the scope of content.
Well, it might be somewhat beyond the scope. It's a question of whether he believes that to be the case, his review of it. But it is a little bit outside the scope.
Your Honor, could we approach on that, on the scope?
Yeah, if you want.
Have another case.
Okay, directly with the general public, is that right?
Not at the present time, only through intermediary of any press writers or any science writers that might pick up something from the annual report, but not directly, no, sir.
The Tobacco Institute, on the other hand, does communicate directly with the public, doesn't it?
I don't know, sir.
You've never seen any member of the Tobacco Institute appear on national television debating a public health official or a surgeon general and taking the contrary position? You've never seen any articles by anyone from the Tobacco Institute trying to find flaws in Surgeon General's reports and other scientific reports saying that cigarette smoking and secondhand smoke cause disease? You've never seen any of that?
I have seen a couple of Tobacco Institute people in debates on television. I have seen that a couple of times. I don't know about the articles. I may have seen them. I just don't remember.
Well, I want you to assume that former Surgeon General Julius Richmond testified in this case that before the 1979 Surgeon General's report came out, the Tobacco Institute preempted it, called a press conference the day before, basically to tell the American people that the information contained in the 1979 Surgeon General's report was flawed and inaccurate. Didn't the Tobacco Institute get their scientific information from the Council for Tobacco Research?
Objection, Your Honor. That's an improper question. The counsels testified, and it is an entirely different question.
Now, this is a different question, that's true, and this one's all right, because he's asked where they got the information from. Over.
Your Honor, he's testified as credited to a question that had nothing to do with the testifying that counsel did.
Overruled.
Would you restate the question, please?
I'd ask the court reporter to.
Question, well, I want you to assume that former Surgeon General Julius Richmond testified in this case that before the 1979 Surgeon General's report came out, the Tobacco Institute preempted it, called a press conference the day before, basically to tell the American people that the information contained in the 1979 Surgeon General's report was flawed and inaccurate. Didn't the Tobacco Institute get their scientific information from the Council for Tobacco Research?
I have no idea where they get it. We certainly do send them copies of the annual report. They're at liberty to get it from any place they want to get it, but they certainly do get copies of the report.
Well, the Tobacco Institute doesn't have any scientific advisory board and doesn't have any Ph.D.s in science, do they?
No foundation, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I don't know,
they?
sir. I don't know, sir.
Now, you've talked about Dr. Clarence Cook Little, who was the original scientific director of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. You are aware of the fact, are you not, that Dr. Little, who was not an MD, was a Ph.D., wrote many articles, gave many speeches along the lines of, it has not been proven that cigarette smoking causes cancer and other diseases. Isn't that correct?
He did speak out and did write articles, particularly in the first 2 years of operation of TIRC, that brought into question this validity of the statistical associations, as did many others.
Well, so did Robert Hockett, who was the Associate Scientific Director of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. He wrote articles and gave speeches in a similar vein, didn't he?
Yes, particularly in the first couple of years. Again, highlighting that there were discrepancies that competent scientists, in fact, recognized.
Well, can you point me to any, as I asked you before, can you point, you keep saying other scientists. I want you to give me the name of some other scientist who never got 10 cents from the tobacco industry, who is totally independent of the tobacco industry, who says what Dr. Little was saying.
His memos, and I don't remember them verbatim, mentioned a number of such scientists back in the late 50s who in fact did say that and who in fact did not get money from the industry. I can't give you chapter and verse, but he didn't quote people only that had been paid by the tobacco industry.
Well,
There
how,
were- The president, I'm sorry, an editorial in the American Medical Association has said before, 1970 or December of 69, said that neither side could claim that the tobacco theory was proven or disproven. That's a number of years after 1954.
but that's certainly not true today and hasn't been true for many, many years. Isn't
I thought-
that a closed debate amongst the medical community of this country and of the world, that cigarette smoking causes cancer and other diseases, and the only people on the other side are tobacco people?
No, that's not true. I think we have to go back to our problem with the word cause. I think that epidemiologically speaking, you're absolutely right. Epidemiologically speaking, no one today doubts that. No one that I know. But everyone also will admit that we don't know the exact pattern of events, the pathway of carcinogenesis. In the early days, they were even questioning the epidemiology itself.
Plaintiff's Exhibit 0426, an article by Robert Hockett, Associate Scientific Director, the Council for Tobacco Research, the title of which is "Smoking Disease Links Continue to Lack Scientific Proof. After $17 million, 827 reports over a 16-year period, Council for Tobacco Research sponsored research fails to find definitive answers." Are you familiar with this document?
I have seen this document. This was in the American Automatic Merchandiser, right?
Whatever it says there,
Yeah.
Dr. McAllister.
I recognize the document. What was your
Well,
question?
my question is not only that article, but that has been the entire pattern of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee and the Council for Tobacco Research to always take the position that it has not been scientifically established that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer and other diseases, just as is the position taken in that article, correct?
In the scientific definition of cause, that is still true.
Still,
Today,
September 30th, 1997, it's still true.
we do not know the exact link that any cigarette component by which any cigarette component causes cancer.
Well, more fundamentally, Dr. McAllister, according to you and according to Dr. Glenn, we don't know if cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. Forget mechanism. We don't know, according to you and Dr. Glenn and the Council for Tobacco Research, whether cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, do we?
You can't forget mechanism when you're using the word cause in this context. Context is very important. I think that we've already established many, many times today, we agree, or I agree, that there is a definite correspondence that implies a causal link in everyday epidemiological terms that invoke public health decisions. I have no quarrel with that whatsoever, but we still don't know the mechanism.
And you,
Doesn't mean that we don't accept the other definition.
well,
I accept it.
you do accept the definition that cigarette smoking causes cancer and other diseases.
In the everyday connotation of cause, I accept that cigarette smoking can contribute to disease in some people. It is not necessary, nor is it sufficient to cause those diseases, but it may play a part. It may certainly play a part, and almost certainly does play a part in some of those people's contracting those diseases.
I want you to assume that special projects were used by Tobacco Council for litigation purposes. Do you believe it is or was appropriate for the Council for Tobacco Research to assist in defeating a lung cancer victim's claims against your supporting tobacco companies?
Now, when you say council, you don't mean our council.
I sure do.
Your Honor, the way approach.
Yes, go ahead. Mark the question. All right, let's proceed.
I believe you testified the Council for Tobacco Research was a not-for-profit entity?
That's my understanding, Mr. Rosenblatt.
Isn't it true that it's a trade association, that it's a business league?
It is a business league. I don't understand trade association in those terms. The IRS designation is a business league. That's a not-for-profit organization.
Are any other funding agencies in this country, other than the Council for Tobacco Research, characterized as business leagues or trade associations by IRS?
Again, my understanding is that most funding organizations receive money from the public as well as part of their income, and therefore are 501c3 organizations, not 501c6 business leagues. They're not businesses in that sense. They are not leagues of business. Now,
Council for Tobacco Research doesn't get any money from the public. It gets all its money from Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Laura Lard, and Brown and Williamson, right?
that's true today, yes, sir.
It's always been true, hasn't it? What do you mean it's true today?
There were other organizations that have given contributions to CTR in the past.
Tobacco organizations.
Yes, they all are, but not just those four.
I mean, you never got a dime from a member of the general public, did you?
No, sir.
You know, you've told us, Dr. McAllister, that science is slow. It's just a slow process until you really get the answers. You said Dr. Little was involved in research for 50 years before he got involved with the Council for Tobacco Research. Tobacco Industry Research Committee, Council for Tobacco Research, been around 43 years. When do you think we're going to have the answers? In another 43 years or tomorrow morning?
You know that's impossible to predict, and if the answers were easy to find, someone besides CTR would have found them a long time ago. The fact that nobody else has found them either, I think, is justifiable proof that the exact link has not been found.
I want you to assume that there are over 50,000 articles, 50,000 articles in the scientific literature and the medical literature in this country on the subject of smoking and health. 50,000 which accept a causal relationship. Articles written by scientists and medical doctors that accept a causal relationship between smoking and lung cancer and other diseases. And I ask you, isn't it true that in view of this, that the sole purpose of the Council for Tobacco Research the last 43 years has been to plant doubt and to pretend that there's some kind of controversy about epidemiology and causation?
Your Honor,
Isn't that what your organization is all about when you get to a bottom line?
are you through now? That's an entirely improper question. There is no evidence in this record regarding this.
I don't want to get into a speaking objection. I don't think we need it. It's overrule the objection.
Will you or the reporter repeat the question now?
I'll try to repeat it. There's 50,000 studies out there by doctors and scientists unconnected with the tobacco industry. So I'm saying to you, isn't it a fact that your organization, the Council for Tobacco Research, exists and is willing to spend this money simply for the purpose of creating doubt and pretending that there is a scientific controversy on the issue of causation in this country?
Objection, lack of foundation, argument.
Overruled.
The basic answer is no. And the reason I say that is the following. You cite these 50,000, you've asked me to accept that they're there, I accept they may be there. Articles that associate smoking and disorders. We've already been through that many, many times today. I accept the association. And I think in a public health, from a public health standpoint, from an epidemiological standpoint, there's no question you have to accept the association. Second part of your question, are we in existence to cast doubt? Absolutely not. We are engaged in trying to uncover the causes of these diseases. We're trying to uncover how these diseases develop. Insofar as tobacco may contribute to those diseases, I think our organization is putting very good money into looking at that link. And I personally, and probably a lot of other people, have no problem with the 50,000 articles at all.
But you've made a distinction in your answer. You pretend as though the 50,000 articles talk about association and epidemiology when in fact they talk about cause. You just don't want to accept the word cause. Isn't that correct?
Just a moment.
What's the objection?
Your Honor, he's describing articles that are not in evidence. He's asking this witness and the jury to...
I understand. The issue here is causation, whether or not he's talking causation or he's talking something else.
Yes, sir,
Whether it's 50,000 or 2, it didn't make any difference if we're talking about causation, and that's the issue.
but his last question,
So the question basically has got itself boiled down to, is he talking about cause, if he wants to deny cause or accept cause, or he's not talking about cause, he wants to talk about epidemiology, accept it or deny it. So if we get down to cause, that's all I really care about,
and that
as to
question...
his issue on cause.
Yes,
So
sir, and that question, I respectfully submit, has been answered at least 15 times.
I would agree with you if you're saying it's
Witnesses.
repetitious. If you're talking repetitious, I would agree with you.
That's the basis
All
of
right,
my...
and I'll
objection.
sustain your
Thank
opinion.
you, sir. It took me a long time to get there.
Well, all right.
Isn't it true that that's the game of the Council for Tobacco Research? To use words like association and epidemiology and thereby attempt to confuse the public on one of the simplest common sense issues that exist, and that is what causes what.
Objection, asked and answered, argument.
It is both of those.
I'm getting a subliminal message from you, Judge.
Gee, it's about time.
You will agree, Dr. McAllister, that the reason why Philip Morris, Lorillard, Reynolds, and Brown and Williamson have been able to fund the Council for Tobacco Research for the past 43 years to the tune of $300 million is because they sell cigarettes, and that's a very profitable business. Isn't that correct?
My understanding is that their source of revenue is the sale of cigarettes, and we are paid from the companies that sell cigarettes. So by definition, I guess you're right.
Hill and Knowlton. Let me read you something from Plaintiff's Exhibit 1001, which says, the heading is Hill and Knowlton, Inc. I believe it's 2 pages, 1.5 pages. Yeah. Forward by, I think, the president of Brown Williamson. You've got it? Follow along with me. Mine doesn't have a page number. Bates number 03382. at the top, Hill and Knowlton, Inc. This organization serves as the public relations counsel to the Tobacco Institute and the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. It is so intimately involved in the affairs of both that a proper separation of functions as well as a strict definition of operations is virtually impossible in this brief summary. However, aside from performing the usual PR functions, collection, preparation, and dissemination of information pertaining to the tobacco industry, Hill and Knowlton can be described as straddling both the Tobacco Institute and the Tobacco Industry Research Committee and sitting as a buffer for each. One only has to look at the organizational relationship in order to see Hill and Knowlton's great influence. For example, Richard Darrow and Carl Thompson are full-time Hill and Knowlton staffers in New York who devote exclusive attention to the Tobacco Institute. Indeed, Mr. Thompson is apparently regarded as the principal contact or informational source of the Tobacco Institute. In Washington, Edward DeHart, a full-time Hill and Knowlton employee, serves as the public relations advisor to Mr. Allen, and on the Washington scene serves in much the same capacity as Mr. Thompson does in New York. Now, in the next paragraph, we start talking about Mr. Hoyt, the executive director of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. Quote, in regard to TIRC, W.T. Hoyt, who has the title of executive director, is and has been on Hill and Knowlton's payroll since the TIRC's organization in 1954. He is, however, quite emphatic in pointing out that he spends all of his time on TIRC matters and hardly knows what's going on at Hill and Knowlton, although the respective offices are adjoining in New York. Another responsibility assumed by Mr. Hoyt is as executive secretary to the TIRC's Scientific Advisory Board. Without question, he is the administrative head of TIRC. Did you know that Mr. Hoyt was on the, although working for the Tobacco Industry Research Committee as executive secretary to the Scientific Advisory Board, was being paid by a public relations firm, Hill and Knowlton?
I did.
You knew that?
Yes.
And it's all right with you? You see no problem?
I didn't find that out till Mr. Hoyt actually passed away. Can I have the date on that memo, please?
Doesn't have a date on it.
Can you estimate when it is, please? That's pretty important.
3rd, 1967.
In addition to Mr. Hoyt, the TIRC librarian is on the Hill and Knowlton payroll, as is the staff secretary. Well, did you know that at the time the Tobacco Industry Research Committee was formed, per the promise to the American people in the frank statement of 1954, that there was this kind of close relationship between the so-called scientific organization and the public relations organization, Hill and Knowlton? Had you known that?
Well, first of all, let's talk about so-called scientific organization. I think we've established it's not a so-called scientific organization. I have even heard that the idea originally for TIRC was out of Hill and Knowlton. It's probably one of the best ideas that ever came out of any public relations firm in the world, if that's true. I don't know that. It is also true that a number of their employees took administrative duties at TIRC. Does that mean that Hill and Knowlton had any influence on the grant program? Of course not.
So
Mr. Hoyt was an employee. I found that out after he passed away. He was an employee, and for some period of time, I don't know, but there is no evidence that I have ever seen that Hill and Knowlton had 1 ounce of influence on what happened to that scientific advisory board. That's a Hill and Knowlton creation, isn't it?
Isn't it? Hill and
Yeah.
Knowlton wrote this to
One of
the
the
American
best things,
people.
one of the best things a public relations firm has ever done.
Better than any Surgeon General's ever done.
Of course
Hill and
not.
Knowlton's done great things.
Of course
for the
not.
American
They had a
people.
fine idea, and they've created an organization that's had a tremendous impact on the biomedical community, and I'm still proud to be associated with it.
they're really a great public relations organization because in spite of the Surgeon General's report of 1964 and some 50,000 studies about cigarette smoking causing lung cancer, you still have millions of Americans who continue to smoke. Because they bought the Council for Tobacco Research line.
Is this a statement? If this is a statement.
Isn't that true?
Your Honor, that doesn't cure the,
No,
Question mark.
All right. Sustain the
all these answers.
argument.
Let me go on. You're, you would agree that if it turns out that all the Surgeon Generals have been right and the public health community is correct and the Centers for Disease Control is correct and that cigarette smoking kills 434,000 Americans every single year, that ain't no laughing matter. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Your Honor.
Well, they laugh, and then I ask,
Overall.
you would agree that's no laughing matter if that turns out to be true.
Your Honor, that calls for speculation as well.
It's a generic question overall.
Of course, no death is a laughing matter. You know I believe that. I know you believe that. Of course not.
And it's certainly not a laughing matter. If you find out, and the CEOs of the tobacco companies find out that they've been peddling a product that's responsible for all those deaths.
That I'll sustain. I'll sustain.
Okay, let me continue with this document. As for its role as a buffer, Hill and Knowlton decides whether questions from outside individuals or organizations are to be directed to the Tobacco Institute or the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. Is that a function you approve of, Dr. McAllister, that a public relations firm decides whether this inquiry goes to the Tobacco Institute and whether that inquiry goes to the Council for Tobacco Research?
Sorry.
Well, he's going to have to make that statement himself if he does. If he knows how the organization functions or not, I don't know. Can you answer the question?
I'm going to answer the question in that I don't know how any of the, how most of the applications to the Council for Tobacco Research originate. I have never heard anybody say, I heard from Hill and Knowlton that I ought to apply to the Council for Tobacco Research. I've never heard that. But we have no screen over that would cover how applications come into us. If any individual investigator has any contact with anybody other than us, we have no way of knowing it at all. But I've never seen any evidence of what you've just described, ever.
And after Hill and Knowlton, it was Zahn. Leonard Zahn Associates became the Hill and Knowlton for the Council for Tobacco Research, correct?
No, definitely not.
What did you need public relations for? You were doing all this legitimate science. You publish your yearly report, which lists all the research that you've done, which you've funded. It should stand on its own feet. What was the need for public relations in this science?
Mr. Zahn's letterhead has public relations in it. Mr. Zahn was not carrying out a public relations function for CTR. He had been with CTR since long before I came. Should we fire a person, hire somebody else to do the annual report proofreading just because he represented at one time a public relations firm? He wasn't doing public relations for CTR.
Every letter that you ever got from Leonard Zahn that's in the files of the Council for Tobacco Research is on the letterhead of Leonard Zahn Public Relations, Inc. Isn't that correct?
I just admitted that. Yes, of course. He uses his letterhead. He was not an employee of CTR, but his functions, as far as I'm able to discern, were not those of public relations. He did write the press release for the annual report. As far as I can tell, that was his function since I got there. His public relations function since I got there is to compose the press release for the annual report, which was distributed however.
Leonard Zahn had been on the staff of Hill and Knowlton, correct?
I don't know. It's reasonable that he would. I honestly don't know that for a fact. I'll accept your designation.
You have seen the Council for Tobacco Research referred to as nothing more than a public relations front, haven't you?
I have seen such memos or heard such things, yes.
And you, of course, deny that. You're telling this jury that the Council for Tobacco Research is a legitimate scientific organization doing research, trying to get to pure truth, with having no interest in getting results that are favorable to the companies which are financing the Council for Tobacco Research 1,000%. That's what you're telling us?
The truth is, that's what we're doing.
And the truth is, Dr. McAllister, that you know nothing about special project research, and you had sitting from your office for 10 years at the Council for Tobacco Research files in a filing cabinet on special projects which you never looked at, correct?
I didn't look at them, that's right.
Because
but
you didn't want to know what was in them. Isn't that correct?
This type of
Isn't that correct?
Just a minute.
Well,
Okay.
this type of conduct.
Just a minute. That may be a legitimate question, because he didn't want to know. That's a legitimate question.
Yeah, but it's the manner
Okay.
in which it's been asked.
He could,
It's the snarling of
all right.
counsel.
This is-
The disrespect that he shows for the court
All right.
and everyone else, that's improper.
Now, this is a speaking objection.
Yes, it is. I don't want to get into this anymore, okay? Calm down, counsel, ask your question.
Isn't it a fact that you didn't look in that filing cabinet, which was a few feet away, because you didn't want to know what was in it? Because had you known what was in it, you would have had to answer questions perhaps in a courtroom differently, correct?
No, absolutely not. I have looked at those files, or most of them now, and my opinions are not changed. I don't see anything in the reports that come out of those projects that makes them in any way suspect. They survived peer review at the journals. I have no idea why each one of them was instituted, but I still don't feel like I avoided anything. If I hadn't needed to do it, I still wouldn't have done it because of lack of interest. Now that I've done it, I have no problem with special projects.
You came to the Council for Tobacco Research in 1983, correct?
Yes, that's right.
You never opened that drawer until August 1997, correct?
Well, he could put it in a date, so I don't know what's the difference.
Isn't that correct?
The date is true. I did not open them because I wasn't interested. I only opened them because I knew that that would be a point of discussion, and I thought I should familiarize myself with them. And now that I've seen them, I repeat, I have no problem with special projects.
That's all I have.
All right. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Dr. McAllister, tell the jury what you did in reviewing the special projects files, what you saw, and what conclusions you reached.
Your Honor, we object. You've already made a ruling on it.
Yeah.
We could approach sidebar, and we
No.
don't feel any door was open by him volunteering that.
But I do. Overruled.
Do you mean, how did I actually go
Why
about?
don't you just tell the jury what you did to look at the files, what you reviewed, what conclusions you reached?
Okay. I knew I wouldn't have time to look at all of them because they're very tedious. Most of the records are, we paid out $436, we paid out $4,336, but there are a few projects in there where they describe what they're going to do. There are letters such as were introduced today where they notify the grantee, you've got this much money coming to you, and there are things that say, if you publish, be sure to differentiate it from the regular grant and aid program as a CTR special project. I saw all of those things. I selected over half of them randomly. I just arbitrarily took half of them and looked at them, and my conclusion is that I frankly think that they can stand on their own scientifically. I don't know why they were made. Or who set them up. I don't understand how they are to be used in litigation. That's not my area. Or if they were ever used in litigation. That really isn't my area. But I can tell you for sure, as a scientist, when an article gets sent to a peer-reviewed publication and gets published, people outside the tobacco industry have said, yes, this is a contribution to our knowledge, and it should be published. And that's what I found. So that's why I say I have no problem with special projects. I saw nothing unusual or untoward in the files.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to hand to you what has been previously marked. I think yes. Defendants 12165 for identification. Dr. McAllister, can you tell the jury what that exhibit is?
This is a letter from the president to one of the special projects recipients, Dr. Feinstein, an MD from Yale University. And he has enclosed, apparently he's thanking him for a proposal and a progress report, asking for a continuation of the research project. And he says that he's pleased to confirm that the money that's required will be provided, paid in equal installments. Checks will be made payable to Yale University School of Medicine. And the records will again designate this undertaking as a special project of the Council for Tobacco Research USA rather than a grant and aid. If a credit line should be inserted in any future publications, it should be so awarded to avoid its being confused with the grant program of the Scientific Advisory Board.
Is that letter typical of letters that was sent to recipients of special project funds through CTR?
Oh yes, very similar.
Is that letter part of the records regularly maintained by CTR in the course of its business?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would offer Defendant's Exhibit, got the number now. 12165.
You accept it.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to ask you to take a look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 462. Could you identify that document to the jury, please?
Yes, this is the summary of all the special projects that was brought together in anticipation of the Waxman hearing in court, in the hearings. But it lists all the special projects.
Okay. Now, could you tell the jury what information is contained in Exhibit 462 relating to special projects?
Every entry is separate. Every entry gives the project number, who did it, where they're working, what the title is, when it was funded, for what period of time, how much money it was for, and if there were any publications, the titles of those publications and where they appeared. And it's just a reiteration, just goes on. That's all it is.
Does Exhibit 462 list every single publication that resulted from a special project?
I don't believe so, because I think this is just the ones that they could find. That it probably underrepresents the total number of publications.
And what types of journals did the special project recipients publish their results in?
They were certainly appropriate to the field. I saw a listing of varieties of good journals. Let's see. I'm trying to find, oh, here we go. American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology.
By the way,
Journal
who reads the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology?
of Obstetricians.
Practicing doctors?
Oh, sure. Practicing doctors read that. I mean, as well as scientists in that area.
Other examples?
Journal of Chronic Diseases, The Pharmacologist, Canadian Journal of Physiological Pharmacology, the Journal of Molecular and Cellular Cardiology, a Journal of Thoracic Cardiology.
Okay, I think we have the general
Okay.
idea.
Those are perfectly respectable journals. These are not third-rank journals.
And they're all peer-reviewed journals.
Oh, they're all peer-reviewed journals, yeah.
Now, Dr. McAllister, based on the work you did in reviewing the special project materials, do you have an opinion about the quality of the science that was funded through CTR special projects?
Your Honor, we'd object. I believe you sustained the objections to quality of science in general. I mean, we're not able to cross-examine.
Yeah, I know.
We approach pretty honest.
No, I don't think it's necessary to do that, but I'll sustain that objection as to the quality. Okay.
Dr. McAllister, did you form any conclusions about whether the type of research funded through CTR special projects was consistent with CTR's overall program and mission to fund research into tobacco and health issues?
Yes, definitely.
And what is that opinion?
Oh, yes, it is consistent. I did form the opinion, and yes, it definitely is consistent.
In your review of the special projects materials, did you see any evidence that CTR or any tobacco company ever suppressed research results that were produced by scientists funded through special projects?
Not once, ever.
Dr. McAllister, you spent a lot of time speaking with Mr. Rosenblatt about cause and whether smoking causes disease. Does science know how cancer occurs?
No, not from smoking, not from any way. We know that it's a breakdown of the genetic material. We know that it's definitely, like Dr. Lynch said it was, it's a genetic disease. We're closing in on it now. We've probably learned more in the last 10 years about cancer than has ever been known, but we still don't know what causes it. I think we're coming, I hesitate to say we're coming close to a cure, because that may not happen for a long time. But we certainly are learning tremendous amounts, and we're making dramatic strides. And I think in our lifetimes we're going to see probably at least a few cancers taken off the map.
Is basic research the avenue which most scientists are pursuing now to identify how cancer occurs?
That's the only way it can be done. There is no other way.
Is that true of diseases like emphysema and respiratory diseases and cardiovascular diseases that have been associated with smoking?
Of course, that's the only way we'll ever cure them.
Did you read Dr. Staples' comments on this subject that were given here in testimony?
Dr. Staples, I think, yes, I think I did.
Do you remember what Dr. Staples said about who might win the Nobel Prize if they unlocked the question of how cancer is caused?
He said anybody that can unlock that puzzle will have a trip to Stockholm, I think is what he said.
And he said it might be a chemist, and the Nobel Prize might be in chemistry, right?
It's possible. It also could be in physiology or medicine or chemistry. But it certainly is a Nobel Prize job, that's for sure. And nobody's gotten it yet.
Now, would you agree with me that medical science uses the most advanced and current techniques available to it in order to address these issues?
Yes, it's like I said before, we don't do horse and buggy science anymore.
And what's the type of science and scientific tools that's available today that was not available, say, back in 1954 when TIRC was founded?
Oh, it's all molecular and cell biology.
And is
That's
that
the heart of stuff that we do these days.
And is that the type of research that CTR is funding?
Oh, yes, that's why there was such a large segment in the annual report on cell biology.
Mr. Rosenblatt asked you some questions about whether SAB members receive funding from CTR. You recall that?
That's correct. I remember that.
Was one of those individuals Dr. Lynch, who's a member of the SAB today?
Yes, he was.
You familiar with the term Lynch syndrome?
Yes, that's actually a clinical condition that's been named after Dr. Lynch. He discovered it. As a matter of fact, he has a couple of syndromes, Lynch syndrome 1, Lynch syndrome 2. That was regarding the clustering of cancers in family. It was a very unique finding, and they actually named that syndrome or disease after Dr. Lynch.
Now, is this concept that was developed by Dr. Lynch the result of work funded by CTR?
Yes, he was funded for that work when, frankly, it was very unpopular, and most people didn't believe it was true. And CTR was one of the few groups that would fund him back in the early days.
And today it's accepted wisdom.
Oh, sure. Oh, no, everybody knows that it's true now.
And today, when an individual patient seeking advice from a physician on breast cancer and familial history, they're likely to be told about what Dr. Lynch has found. Isn't that right?
Sustained reading, speculation.
Lynch syndrome is a clinical term, isn't it?
That's right.
And it's used in clinical offices with patients, correct?
That's correct.
Objection, same objection.
Yeah, but we're way far afield, if anything. Sustained.
The lack of quality of CTR-funded research?
Objection is speculative, unless he got a letter or is going to tell us
Well,
about a
first
phone
of all,
call.
it is very leading. Okay?
Object is leading, too.
It is leading. Let's go sidebar.
That's fine. It's fine, yeah.
Mr. Rosenblatt asked you a question, whether you were aware of any organization that had been, in effect, denied the right to have its research published in its journals. Remember that question?
Yes.
Are you aware of any industry, other than the tobacco industry, that has created an organization and given funds to that organization to conduct independent scientific research, as CTR has done?
Not right offhand, no, sir.
Dr. McAllister, by the way, was special projects, was information about special projects reported on CTR's tax return?
Yes.
Dr. McAllister, when you're talking about public health officials and the views they might express about smoking and health, you said that you didn't quarrel with them just using terminology that smoking causes disease X. Does CTR, or to your knowledge, the industry, dispute that smoking is a risk factor?
Objection is repetitious.
Not really, overall.
Oh, of course not. You can't ignore that. No one denies that.
And do you have any quarrel with public health officials advising people to avoid contact with risk factors?
Of course not.
Is that your understanding of what public health officials have been doing?
That's their job.
Yeah, basically it is leading. The question is, what is your understanding?
Mr. Rosenblatt asked you a few questions about the Tobacco Institute. Has CTR ever consulted with or advised the Tobacco Institute about what it should say concerning the state of scientific knowledge?
No, I've never seen any evidence of that.
Have you ever, or you or anyone else at CTR, to your knowledge, ever consulted with the Tobacco Institute about how to characterize scientific findings?
No, never.
Was one of the functions of CTR to make factual information about smoking and health available to the public?
Of course, yes.
Leading?
Yep.
Sustained?
Did CTR have any role with respect to making factual information available to the public?
Yes, CTR did make factual information available to the public through journals that its grantees published, journal articles of grantees published through the annual report, and through the annual report.
The various materials, including, for example, the Hill and Knowlton press release or the Leonard Zahn material that Mr. Rosenblatt showed you and that you reviewed, is it your opinion that that material was making factual information available to the public?
My understanding is it was in no way misleading. It was factual information.
And was factual information about smoking and health issues?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Rosenblatt showed you, I think it was Exhibit 1001, which talked about the role Hill and Knowlton played at the Council for Tobacco Research. Did any activities that Hill and Knowlton performed at any time, to your knowledge, ever influence the scientific research that CTR funded?
No, I never found any influence at all expressed. I never saw any evidence of that, not once.
Any evidence that any public relations type person was deciding what research to fund?
Absolutely never.
Did any member of that distinguished board of scientific advisory board members ever complain to you or to anyone at CTR that they felt CTR's mission was over, that it should shut its doors and should stop funding research into diseases associated with smoking?
Of course not.
Dr. McAllister, the members of the Scientific Advisory Board included, for a substantial period of time, as you testified, employees of the United States government.
Object is leading, Your Honor.
And it's also not within the scope of the
Yeah.
course.
Where are you going with the question, sir?
I'll go sidebar if you'd like, Your Honor.
I would like to avoid sidebars. if we can
Okay.
Avoid it.
Let me see if I can rephrase it.
Rephrase it.
During the period that CTR was funding research, during the period of time that Mr. Rosenblatt questioned you about whether CTR had researched and answered the question about cancer causation and other disease causation, were there employees of the United States government who were members of the Scientific Advisory Board?
This is more leading than the previous question.
No, over.
Yes, from a period of 1962 to 1986, paid employees of the National Cancer Institute sat on our board and made funding decisions.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
All right, Doc, you may step down. Thank you. Lawyer conference.